Giri talked about when she first met Gary. My story is not quite as entertaining or as much fun or as characteristic, but it's still pretty characteristic of Gary. So I was out here to give a seminar. I was a graduate student. I was giving an informal talk. And Gary called me into his office about an hour and a half before the seminar. And he said, "So, Scott, good to meet you. What are you going to talk about in the seminar today?" And he immediately wanted me to start presenting to him everything that I was going to give in an hour and a half. And we had a standard sort of Becker seminar with just him and me for 45 minutes. And at the end of this 45-minute dialectic, I suppose, he said, "Okay, this is pretty interesting. You should present on this in the seminar." To this day, I do not know what I would have done had he said something else. But I was incredibly lucky. So that seminar turned into eventually a visit and research scholarship at the Becker Friedman Institute, where I was hosted by Gary and by Jim and by Lars. It was absolutely incredible. It was really life-changing for my research and for my interaction with economics more broadly. So this paper is the very last paper I presented before Gary. And it's joint work with John Hatfield and Fujito Kojima. And it's about strategy-proofness and a link between strategy-proofness and investment efficiency. And it's really sort of a paper in market and mechanism design, but it starts very much with a Beckerian idea. Human capital analysis starts with the assumption that individuals decide in their education, training, medical care, and other additions to knowledge and health by weighing the benefits and costs. That's out of the Nobel Prize address, and it's a nice, succinct, clear statement about investment in human capital. And now when we do mechanism design, we actually start much later. We usually look only at the market clearing stage. And this isn't not global by any stretch of the imagination. And today we'll talk about several papers that have looked at the investment stage. But for the most part, mechanism design looks at the world as a static state in which people have determined their abilities, their preferences, all of this stuff. They're the inputs to the mechanism. And we're just thinking about what happens at the time of market clearing. And so what I'm going to attempt to do today, and what this paper tries to do in general, is it tries to link up these two ideas. Understand how the choice of market clearing mechanism, which of course is a huge part of the, the benefits and costs that we think about when we're doing human capital analysis, how that interacts with ex-ante investment. And now, so first of all, it's going to sort of try and bring these investment and human capital questions into mechanism design. A second thing this will enable us to do is answer a price theory question. And when I say a price theory question, I literally mean an assignment from the homework from last year's price theory class. So the story, consider a finite marriage market. We're in a very Beckerian world. Agents differ only in their publicly observable quality of education and complementarity in marriage surplus. So this is a very standard Becker marriage framework. And the question is, and this actually was a homework problem, suppose some woman has to choose her level of education while everyone else's education level is held fixed. How does the social gain from the woman's investment differ from the private gain? So how big is the deviation between the woman's private incentives to invest in education and the socially optimal incentives? So that's a microcosm of this paper. So what we're going to try and do is characterize exactly the market clearing mechanisms that are fully efficient in the sense that they give efficient alternatives, they choose efficient alternatives ex post, and they induce efficient investment ex ante. So, going back to our price theory problem for a second, we're looking to see which types of mechanisms for clearing the marriage market will give the woman the actually socially optimal incentives to invest. Okay? So that's the story. That's the goal. We want to know when mechanisms are both ex post efficient, so they choose an efficient alternative, and ex ante efficient in the sense that they induce efficient investment. So very quickly, what we're going to find, and I'll give you sort of two cuts of this for a reason which I'll explain in a second. A mechanism is going to induce efficient investment if and only if it's what we call provides marginal rewards. That is, if you get to internalize the full change in the social surplus. So that's not too surprising, but what sits on top of that is that an ex post efficient mechanism, so a mechanism that chooses an efficient alternative, provides marginal rewards if and only if it is strategy-proof. And so in particular, we're going to see that a mechanism is fully efficient if and only if it's both ex post efficient, so it chooses an efficient alternative, and strategy-proof. And this is very exciting because this is the type of mechanism design we do all the time. A lot of time when we think about the static mechanism design problem without this investment stage, exactly what we're looking for is a mechanism that is as efficient as possible and as close to strategy-proof as possible. So rephrased in hieroglyphics, a mechanism induces efficient investment if and only if it provides marginal rewards, conditional on being efficient. That's if and only if it's strategy-proof. Why the hieroglyphics? Well, this linkage with provision of marginal rewards is going to allow us to actually relax the strictness of the conditions. And we'll be able to talk about approximate incentives. So now, it turns out it's pretty hard to find mechanisms that are both efficient and strategy-proof. We'll talk exactly about what they look like in a little bit. But it's much closer. You can find mechanisms that are sort of approximately efficient and approximately strategy-proof. And in one direction, it's going to be very simple. So if you're approximately inducing efficient investment, then you're approximately strategy-proof. The reverse is going to be true as well if you're approximately strategy-proof and approximately efficient. So you're pretty close to giving people incentives to reveal their true types, their true preferences. And you're pretty close to choosing the socially optimal alternative. Then you're going to get very, very close to providing marginal rewards, but you actually pick up this additional factor. So it's not quite going to be that epsilon strategy proof plus eta efficient implies epsilon plus eta efficient investment incentives. You get this additional coefficient, which is going to be the size of the set of equivalence classes of outcomes. So in a setting where there's only two options for you either get the good or you don't. It's just an auction. This is going to be very small. That's going to be two. You can only two things can happen to you. Lots of things can happen to other people, but they don't affect you. And so somehow the degree of ex-ante investment incentives are going to be related to the number of different ways the mechanism can work out for you. And in some sense, you could think of this as being a little bit like the number of different types of externalities that the market can have on you. Now I'm going to lay out a model that's going to start with a very basic mechanism design looking framework, and then we'll stack the investment question on top of it. So there's a finite set of agents, a finite set of alternatives, valuation functions. So every agent is going to have a valuation that takes alternatives to numbers. And the space of all valuations, we're not going to need this notation much, but at times we'll have to talk about exactly what this space looks like. So there's a space of valuations, and we'll need the space for everyone as well. Basically, you could think of these as being a couple of alternatives. Simple example would be an auction where you have some value for having the good and some value for not. So two alternatives equivalent for you. The complete set of alternatives is just who gets the good. Your value for the one where you get it is some number. Everything else is 0. Social welfare we're going to measure by taking the sum of everyone's value for the alternative. And then we're going to stack a mechanism on top of this framework. So we're going to have some rule that takes in a set of a profile of valuations. Everyone tells us what their values are, and we're going to choose an allocation. And then a transfer rule where we might also make transfers among individuals. And here, another piece of the generality of this framework, we're being very agnostic about the types of alternatives and the types of transfers and things we're allowing. So in some sense, we're trying to also bridge between different classes of matching models, matching with and without transfers, matching with partial transfers, all of these things, although it's going to turn out that we need, some serious structure of transfers here, but we often won't need sort of very large parts of the transfer space. We're also linking all of this with auctions. So again, the allocation system could be a matching that spits out an assignment of workers to firms. It could also be an auction rule that hands out goods to individuals. So it's not just going to be things like investing in human capital before you participate in the labor market, but it's also going to be investing in complementary goods before you go into an auction. Mechanism just takes an allocation rule and a transfer rule. And then given the chosen alternative and a transfer vector, we're going to have utility that's quasi-linear in cash. So it's just your valuation for the chosen alternative net of any transfers you pay or receive. Okay? So normally when we do mechanism design, and lots of people who design actual real-world mechanisms basically stop here. So this is the framework you need to think about how you're going to allocate a good. But now, if we want to add in an investment term, we need to allow the agents to determine their valuations. So here you're going to take some investment. Maybe it'll be schooling. We'll determine what your value is for certain types of jobs. If you don't acquire the human capital for a high-end job, you go into the high-end job. Maybe you even have a negative value. And the way you model this is you think about an explicit choice of the valuation function. So without loss of generality, when someone invests, when you're deciding how much time to study, what you're really doing is choosing how much you're going to get out of every possible outcome you could have in the market. It's a bit of an unusual way to think about it, but it reduces the entire question of your investment. And again, it makes it very general. You could be choice of schooling, could be choice of developing complementary goods for something you could win in an auction. It makes the entire question of investment just a choice of your value. And so finally, and this is going to be our sort of big utility primitive, there's ex ante utility. So before the mechanism is run, you get sort of the utility from a given alternative and transfer rule, net of the costs of your choice of valuation. All right? So apologies for being notation heavy as an aside. This is more notation than probably in any other talk in the series. I promise we're done with notation, but now we have to move on to conditions. So most of these are going to be familiar. So strategy-proofness, this is just truthfulness. A mechanism is strategy-proof if the optimal thing for you to do, irrespective of what everyone else is doing, is to state your true preferences. So a mechanism is strategy-proof for I if, for all possible valuations and all other value you could state, you get more out of stating your true value. So this is just when you show up to the market mechanism, you want to represent as yourself. You want to state your true preferences or your true type, your true valuation for outcomes, for the good, anything of that sort. Okay? Provision of marginal rewards, as I said earlier, this condition is just that you get the marginal social surplus return from a change in investment. So, or from a change in valuation, rather. So a mechanism provides marginal rewards if for all values you might have and for any value you might change to, the social difference in value, so the social difference between V and V bar, is equal to your private difference between V and V bar. So you internalize all of the social change in the outcome. And then the last key condition is inducing efficient investment. So now we've got the third condition in the title, so we're almost free of conditions. We must be. This is the subtle one. So we're going to say a mechanism induces efficient investment if, for all possible valuations others might have, so it's a little bit revelation principle-like. We're taking everybody else's actions as given. The valuation that maximizes your private utility, ex ante, is equal to the valuation that maximizes, or gives the same utility as the valuation that maximizes social welfare. So what this means is that you are incentivized to make the socially optimal investment given what everybody else is doing. And note that it's an individual level condition. So all of these conditions are individual level. I've talked about strategy proof for an individual agent, provision of marginal rewards to an individual agent. And here, inducing efficient investment, again, for an individual agent. And the reason for this is that we'll sometimes be able to find mechanisms that give good human capital incentives to some people and bad ones to others. All these conditions we talk about are going to act at the individual level. And that does mean, as an aside, it's a little bit strange. This is not quite an equilibrium condition. This becomes an equilibrium condition. You sort of get efficient equilibria if your mechanism induces efficient investment for everybody. And so we also have to be a little bit wary as we think about the implications of the model. Last thing, a mechanism is efficient if it chooses a socially optimal alternative. Nothing surprising about that one, but it'll also figure clearly into the theorems. All right, so that's the framework. We now have laid out the model, done with conditions at least for a while, and I can tell you something about them. So a mechanism induces efficient investment if and only if it provides marginal rewards. So this means that you are incentivized to make the socially optimal investment, ex ante, if and only if you're going to be able to, when the mechanism is run, take the full social return from that investment. And this isn't terribly surprising. It's laying it out in this direction seems pretty straightforward. If the mechanism provides marginal rewards, then you're getting all the additional surplus you create by choosing a valuation. And so in particular, when you're optimizing, you're basically solving the social optimization problem. You're trying to pick the valuation that's going to create the most value in the pie. And then meanwhile, And this is sort of the, the strength of the for all cost functions in the condition. If you don't provide marginal rewards, then in particular, there's some cost function that makes the socially optimal and agent optimal investment choices differ. And this is exactly where you're going to get inefficient investment ex ante. But now laying those out together, it turns out that a mechanism provides marginal rewards if it is efficient. Path connectedness will just, that's essentially literally a technical assumption. An efficient mechanism provides marginal rewards if and only if it's strategy proof. And so while the first two parts of this theorem, the link between efficient investment and provision of marginal rewards is actually sort of feels extremely natural, it provides this linkage between inducing efficient investment and truthful revelation. So now, mechanisms that incentivize individuals to truthfully reveal their type when they show up to market clearing, so long as the mechanism itself is efficient, is going to also induce efficient investment ex ante. Let's just really quickly do out an example with a second price auction. So this is if you win the auction, you get the good, and you pay the second highest bid. We'll have two agents, J and K, and one object, and everyone's valuation, they can choose at a cost that's just the square of that value. So you're picking the value for winning the auction. So I'm abusing notation slightly. The fully efficient outcome, so the socially optimal investment outcome, ex ante, is that one agent is going to invest in valuation 1/2, which is the best valuation that you choose given this cost function. And the other agent is going to invest in valuation 0. So in particular, if one guy is going to win the auction in this setting, the other one investing is socially wasteful. Right? It costs him something to invest. He's not going to get the good, so that cost is just socially costly. So we want an equilibrium for him to invest 0 and get nothing. And in fact, that's exactly what the equilibrium looks like. And here, so a second price auction is strategy proof. Your dominant strategy is to state your true valuation. Here, actually, we get sort of a fully efficient outcome for the entire economy because it's strategy proof for both agents. J is going to invest, J, without loss of generality, is going to invest in valuation 1/2 at cost 1/4 as he should. K is going to invest in valuation 0. J is going to win the object and pay nothing. So the full social payoff is 1/4. And now you might ask, well, so J's pretty happy. He just got the good for free. What you want to know is why K doesn't want to deviate. Well, in order to deviate, remember, K has got to have a valuation higher than 1/2. So he doesn't gain anything from bidding more or less than his value in the auction. It's truthful. The optimal thing to do is state his true value. So in order to win the auction, he's got to show up with a value of greater than 1/2. And so he's got to invest in some higher value. But when he does so, he's going to pay 1/2 in the auction. And on top of that, he's going to pay some cost that's greater than 1/4. You can solve out the algebra, and you see that he's always unhappy. He never wants to have done this. In fact, what he'd really like to, closest thing he'd like to do is be at that 1/2 mark, but that doesn't quite work. He doesn't quite win. And so in equilibrium, K doesn't want to switch his bid, or his valuation, and thus doesn't want to change his bid. J gets the object. And again, we could swap them just as effectively. We reach the socially efficient outcome. Everyone's happy. So what we've just seen is that second price auctions are strategy proof and efficient. That means that they induce efficient investment. This fact was already known. There's a beautiful paper by Azrazomena and Cantillon that shows that. We also sort of learned on the other side that sometimes you can't induce efficient investment. And this echoes some ideas of Rogerson, and that showed that because we can't get strategy-proof efficient bilateral trading mechanisms, assuming individual rationality and budget balance, we also can't induce efficient ex-ante investment. So somehow hold up and truthful revelation look the same. And then there's I'll talk for a second about how you can adapt our results to look at also now at things like information acquisition. So notice I had sort of total certainty everywhere. Nobody was uncertain about their values. You can actually adapt our results to show that efficient strategy-proof mechanisms also induce efficient information acquisition. This harkens back to a result by Bergman and Valimaki. To do this, and for a bunch of reasons, we're not going to do it on the board, we actually need to incorporate two different types of uncertainty at once. So one of them is uncertainty that's resolved after investment but before market clearing. You might have uncertainty about how your investment affects the types of values you might have. And then you might, even after that, have uncertainty about what your value is. You might not know something about state of the world that's going to determine what your true value for operating a cell tower is. And so actually, investment now is going to be a choice of distributions of valuations, which is mathematically messy, but all of the concepts and theorems generalize. They need some measure theoretic adjustments, but nothing that gets away from the key intuition that strategy-proofness and investment efficiency are, in some sense, very deeply linked. So now I promised you some price theory. So now, remember we had our finite marriage market with agents differing only in publicly observable quantity of education, and there's complementarity in the marriage surplus function. And the question, as it stood, was that if we have some woman who has to choose her level of education, this is her investing, while everyone else's education level is held fixed, they don't get to invest, so any mechanism we choose is going to be strategy-proof for them. We're just assuming we know their type. How close, how efficient is the woman's investment? And the answer is that if we're running woman optimal stable matching with transfers, well, this is efficient and strategy-proof for women. So the market clearing outcome that sort of picks the price level, the women get as much of the marriage surplus as they can, in some sense. This mechanism is efficient, allocates matchings, men and women efficiently, and it's strategy-proof for the women, incentivizes them to reveal their true preferences and true types. Thus, the privately optimal choice is actually socially efficient. It's exactly an invocation of our theorem. Strategy-proofness plus efficiency equals inducing efficient investment. And so you can actually use theorems in the sort of the meta theory of market design to solve homework problems in the Chicago price theory class. I assume this was the intended solution, Kevin. Excellent. In the last few minutes, there's one sort of problem with the analysis that I've presented it to you, which is that most mechanisms are actually not both strategy-proof and efficient. In fact, if you're both strategy-proof and efficient, you look sort of like a Vickrey mechanism, at least at the individual level. But there are lots of useful mechanisms that are either approximately strategy-proof or approximately efficient. And passing through provision of marginal rewards, we can sort of look at which mechanisms approximately provide marginal rewards, and we can show a much more general theorem. So very quickly, we've got to expand out all of our conditions. Epsilon strategy-proof. Strategy-proof with an epsilon is going to mean that stating your true value is approximately the optimal thing for you to do. Providing marginal rewards within epsilon means that you get at least all but epsilon of the change from social to social surplus. And inducing efficient investment within epsilon. Now, this means that your optimal investment, so that your privately optimal investment, is within epsilon of being socially optimal. So again, all I've done is sort of relax all of the conditions I had before so that they're no longer tight. They now allow you to sort of have a little margin of error. Same thing with approximate efficiency. You're going to be efficient within eta if we choose an outcome that's sort of eta, just a small margin away from being fully efficient. And so first of all, a mechanism induces efficient investment with an epsilon if and only if it provides marginal rewards with an epsilon. That's a straight generalization of our own old argument. You just sort of add in the epsilons. Moreover, if you provide marginal rewards with an epsilon, then you're efficient with an eta, then you're strategy-proof with an eta plus epsilon. That's also a quick push through of the old arguments. The subtlety actually happens when you're thinking about the reverse direction. So, and this is the one that's sort of most relevant for design. If I give you a mechanism that's strategy-proof with an eta, with an epsilon, and efficient with an eta, and I ask you, sort of tell me about the inducing the incentives on efficient investment, the answer is that you're going to induce efficient investment within epsilon plus eta times an additional coefficient that is the number of equivalence classes of outcomes you face. So sort of look at the whole space of the market. How many different things could happen to you? This might be a big number, but it's really probably much smaller than the total number of alternatives. So in particular, if you're thinking about something like a multi-unit auction, you can win some number of these objects, but there are in general combinatorially many ways of allocating the objects to other people. So for you, this coefficient is linear, and in general, it can be pretty the total number of alternatives can be pretty large. And unfortunately, this bound is tight, so this is the best we can do. So the question is really, in some sense, when can we think about this bound as being small? or the whole bound together as being small. Well, I'm going to give one very specific example. There are lots of places where we have mechanisms that are nearly efficient or nearly strategy-proof. All sorts of different varieties. There's there are auction designs or sort of approximate competitive equilibrium mechanisms that have been proposed by computer scientists because it's hard to actually compute competitive equilibrium allocations, and so they've given approximations that let you get things that are very close. There's this quadratic voting mechanism that Glenn Weil's been working on in a number of different contexts that also sort of asymptotically gets very, very close to efficient. Simple mechanisms like double auctions are also asymptotically efficient. So there are lots of reasons to think about things that are approximately efficient or approximately strategy-proof. But I want to focus again on human capital. We're here at the Becker conference, so we've got back our assumption that individuals decide in their education, training, medical care, and other additions to knowledge by weighing the costs. How do we clear labor markets? Well, when we're doing market design, we sometimes clear labor markets thinking about them as sort of matching with transfers. In the Kelso-Crawford model, they're actually discrete transfers. So we can't make perfectly continuous transfers, but we can get very, very close. We can only go down to pennies, if you will. And so the story has a set of workers, each of whom has a unit demand. They each want a job. There's a set of firms. The firms have what we call substitutable preferences. That means there aren't complementarities between workers in the sense that getting one worker makes you desire some other more. And this is just important for existence. We don't actually need to talk about it in any detail here. And there's a salary increment. So this is sort of the increment, the smallest unit I can transfer to you in a given push. And so Kelso and Crawford showed in a beautiful paper in 1982, apologies for the typo on the slide, that the cumulative offer process actually produces a stable outcome. So if I run what's essentially an auction, bringing workers to jobs where people get bid up to their marginal productivities, then we get an outcome that's stable. It's like it is a competitive equilibrium allocation. And then Hatfield and Milgram in 2005, Hatfield is my co-author, John Hatfield, Milgram is Paul Milgram, showed that the cumulative offer process is also strategy-proof for the workers. So it incentivizes the workers to reveal their true preferences. And then lastly, what we can show is that if the range of salaries is sufficiently large, so sort of if people can make high offers and low offers when they need to, then any stable matching is going to be approximately efficient. It's going to be efficient within the number of agents times the salary increment. And so when I take all these theorems together, we see that the cumulative offer process is stable, strategy-proof for workers, and approximately efficient. And recall our theorem. If we have a mechanism that's at least approximately strategy-proof, and here we're actually fully strategy-proof, and approximately efficient, then we're going to provide marginal rewards and induce efficient investment within this bound. And so a consequence is the cumulative offer process actually gets very close to incentivizing socially optimal human capital investment on the part of workers. So the induces efficient investment within the number of alternatives. This is the number of possible firms you could work with, plus the possibility of remaining unmatched, times this efficiency bound, which is essentially quadratic in the number of agents. So when the salary increment is small or small enough, getting close to a perfectly transferable utility setting, then we actually give all the workers in a Kelso-Crawford labor market match very, very good incentives for ex-ante investment. And so that's sort of where I want to leave us thinking about applications. I've sort of taken us starting and ending with human capital investment and mechanism design. So the cumulative offer process induces approximately efficient investment for every worker. And again, the degree of approximation improves the closer you get to perfect transfers. And I guess you could rephrase that. So an effective market clearing mechanism, so it's efficient and it's strategy proof, can induce efficient human capital investment. And I guess so I was writing that on the slide and I thought about it, and I sort of like to think that Gary's just sitting here thinking, well, I could have told you that. QED.
So we can always think of matching under transferable utility in terms of mechanism, and it has all the good property. Now, there is a series of paper by Cole, Melath, and Postlewaite. They're looking at exactly this problem. And what they find is that one thing is you can always, the efficient equilibrium is always one of the equilibria, but there are also some equilibria which are the, quote, coordination failure equilibria. So I was wondering, what was the relationship with your results?
So that's a really good question. So Pierre-Andre pointed out, so there's this amazing body of work by Cole, Melath, Postlewaite, Samuelson, and some other co-authors on competitive equilibrium matching with ex-ante investment. And what they find is that there are competitive marketplaces where people's wages adjust correctly. Essentially, a strategy-proof setting can generate one equilibrium where there's efficient ex-ante investment. But they also find miscoordination equilibria. And it's possible that sort of everybody is investing incorrectly, and that there's some big social change I could make that would move everyone to a more efficient outcome. So starting again the price theory slide, it's actually not it's not without loss of generality that we turned off everybody else's investment in this problem, right? We made it that we're only looking at one woman's investment decision, and this was in the original problem set. And the reason for that, I think, is exactly this issue, that as soon as you have two agents investing, then you can get lots of miscoordination in principle because everyone is investing conditional on what everyone else is doing. And so we're not ruling out miscoordination equilibria. We're just figuring out when there can be ex-ante efficient equilibria, period. But miscoordination still definitely can be an issue. Great question.
So I think you gave us the intuition for the connection between this ex-ante incentive, ex-ante efficient investment, and the marginal, capturing the marginal. Mm-hmm. I didn't feel like I really got the intuition for the connection between mechanisms that give agents their marginal benefit and ones that are strategy proof. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So the question is, I explained in detail the intuition of how conditions 1 and 2, or stages 1 and 2 here are linked. So producing efficient investment linked to providing marginal rewards. I didn't really talk very much at all about how providing marginal rewards relates to strategy proofness. So this is essentially a generalization of a very famous theorem of Green and Lafont that says a mechanism that chooses an efficient alternative and gives truthful incentives for everyone has got to look like a Groves mechanism or like a Vickrey mechanism. You're sort of locally charging everybody some tax that's a function of everyone else's revelation, and this forces you to make the socially optimal decision, socially optimal revelation yourself. And so here, essentially what's happening is we're keying off of that. So as soon as we make a mechanism strategy proof for some individual, if it's choosing an efficient alternative ex post, it's looking to them essentially like a second price auction or a Vickrey type setting. And that means in particular that they've got to be getting their marginal reward. Vice versa, mechanisms that provide marginal rewards, it's pretty quick to check that basically that you lose if you don't state your true preferences, because then there might just be some social loss from that relative to the true state. Derek.
So I want to understand the thickness of the market part of this. So if we had the marriage problem, but we had 3 men, 3 women, and then you let one woman, before we run the deferred acceptance algorithm, say, you have a chance to invest now and make yourself. I would have thought that there would be a divergence between the private and social there because she could steal someone else's husband. And so does that mean that with those numbers, there's a violation of strategy proofness in using the deferred acceptance algorithm?
Great question. So the question is, we've got 3 players. Something seems a little bit strange here. Shouldn't the woman be able to steal a husband, or have we violated strategy proofness? So first of all, deferred acceptance woman proposing is strategy proof for the women. We are assuming that there's this transfer component as well, right? So in order for it to be efficient in general, you actually also need these transfers. Otherwise, it's Pareto efficient, but not necessarily globally efficient. And Pareto efficiency, can gap far from total welfare in times. So, also non-trivially on this slide, we focused on the woman optimal stable matching. So Without transfers, we're getting, it's breaking down at the efficiency level. With transfers, woman optimal stable matching is going to be strategy proof. It turns out that if you, if she were overreaching to try and reach for some other husband, then this doesn't work out in equilibrium. She doesn't gain enough from that to be worth her additional investment. If we move away from woman optimal stable matching, this conclusion can go away. But you also asked about market thickness. So Derek also was thinking about sort of the 3 women part of the example, right? It's a small market, and so you'd be much more worried about strategic effects. That intuition is definitely true in general. So there's a large and growing literature, which a number of people, including Fujito, my co-author, and Parag Pathak, others, some in Chicago, Eric Budish has been very involved. There's a growing literature on what happens when matching markets and other market design settings get very, very large. And the incentives for misrepresentation vanish as the markets get bigger. And so your intuition that the market size should matter is definitely right. In a large market, we don't need to be as careful about the we don't need to be as careful about the type of mechanism we've chosen because you get strategy proofness closer to being for free, and that's sort of a competitive equilibrium type idea.
All right, thanks very much.
Thank you.